The Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads, each formed during and immediately after the Civil War, both espoused segregation as an unwritten rule. Though the Chinese literally saved the Central Pacific as it languished in the western foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, they were still treated as inferiors to their white counterparts. Their role, as well as the roles of other racial minorities, was seen as no more than necessary manual labor. By the 1950s, this had changed very little. At Union Station, African Americans were never found in administrative positions. On the trains, they served food. In the station, they carried luggage. In spite of the well-oiled machine image the station undoubtedly deserved, the existence of segregation threw a shadow over operations.
It was segregation period when I first got here. Yeah, when I first got to Ogden, it was a segregated place, you know. And I was playing music, and I didn't play just in black clubs. I played all over. I played a lot of places. But the one time that I played in a place out in Roy, and I had some friends of mine came in, and the guy told me they couldn't stay in there. So that's when I decided, well, if my friends and my people can't come and hear me play, I just play places where they can.
Blacks were dressed nicely and treated everyone with respect. But they could little expect equal treatment from the white majority who passed through Ogden. But on 25th Street, a black woman named Annabelle Weekly would seek to change that and would transform a local black club into one of the most respected in the West.
Annabelle was there during the time that it was really pronounced. I mean, if you think about it, you have to have a hotel and restaurant just for blacks because of the fact that there was so much prejudice and they couldn't go to these other places.
The only places black people could eat in Ogden was at one or two of these Chinese places. You couldn't go to any other restaurants and eat. What do you mean how you get used to it? You're born with it. When I was born down in Mississippi, they had a place for blacks and a place for whites.
She married Billy Weekly, proprietor of the Porters and Waiters Club. The four-building complex housed black railroad workers as they slept between shifts. No women were allowed, and no whites. However, its atmosphere invited degenerate lifestyles, and the place was trashed and not welcoming.
It must have been 1948 when a fella pulled out his gun and it went off, and the bullet hit my husband in the middle of his hand and killed a fella in the door. And I reached to get him as he was falling in the door, and he died on my shoulder.
Annabelle realized that by charging an admission price, she could raise the level of clientele. She took out a loan in 1952 to have a lounge built in the basement, and through a local agent began booking high-class blues and jazz players.
Porters and Waiters was probably the most lively building on 25th Street. We used to seat 250 people down there in the lounge.
She brought in such greats as Fats Domino, B.B. King, Earl Bostic, Tiny Bradshaw, Marvin Gaye, and Count Basie.
Musicians that would come in here from big bands like Count Basie and Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman and all those bands and things like this, they all knew that they could jam when they came to Ogden. See, a lot of those musicians in those big bands and things, they're playing all this structured stuff. So a lot of guys, they'd look me up. Sometimes I'd be home in bed and they'd call me, And we here, man, we'd like to come down. And they said, you could go and jam down Porters and Waiters. I said, that's right. And I have gotten out of bed at night and go down and we start a session.
Soon the Porters and Waiters assumed a reputation that in the railroad's peak was unrivaled on 25th Street and matched only by those clubs in the major cities. It became so well known, it was said to have once received a letter simply addressed Porters and Waiters Club, 25th Street.
There was prejudice here, just like any other place during those periods. I think it went all the way until the 50s, 60s. The thing that I think is wonderful about her is that she rose so high above it, and so did Joe McQueen. What they did is they got in and they just added to building a positive environment and world for them.
I just refused to play where my friends and black people couldn't come in, so then they decided, well, hell, they were losing money because my band drew every place I played, it was packed all the time. So they decided, well, they weren't going to lose that money because of that. So after a while, that stuff just disappeared,
Annabelle was the first black woman to run a business in Ogden. She redirected some of her profits from the club to help finance welfare projects in the city, as well as paying for the medical expenses of members of her community.
I set the tone that black people needed something better, and I tried to help them to enjoy something better. Helping people to see that they don't have to fail and that they can do better. And that's a joy to me.
I know when I took her down there, everywhere we went, people flooded out of the buildings to see her. She is a legend. In fact, when the Hilton opened up, their restaurant was named Annabelle's, and their bar was called Porters and Waiters. And I asked her, I said, well, did you get a cut of that? And she goes, no, they just took my name. He says, I didn't even get a meal. They invited me for the grand opening. I didn't even get a free meal.